My name is Hannah Wallace, 34 years old, and this is the story of how a garden became my battlefield, my refuge, and my revenge. After the divorce, when the silence of my empty house felt like it was pressing against my chest, I found myself standing in the middle of my backyard, staring at nothing but dirt. The house was mine, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The walls still carried the echoes of arguments, the bitter sting of betrayal, and the shame of being left for another woman. So I decided to build something new, something alive. The garden started as an act of desperation, but quickly grew into my sanctuary. Every rose bush I planted, every stone I placed along the pathways, every trellis I trained with vines. It wasn't just landscaping, it was survival. My neighbors would stop by, complimenting the lavender hedge or the way the sunlight seemed to dance across the koi pond I had carefully built. They didn't know the truth. Those flowers were the only reason I got out of bed some mornings. But healing is fragile, and one careless act can unravel months of work. The first time, I noticed nothing more than tire tracks pressed deep into the grass. My tulips bent like broken soldiers, and a corner of my white fence splintered. I tried to tell myself it was an accident. Maybe someone reversed poorly. Maybe a delivery truck cut too close. I patched the grass, replaced the brick edging, and whispered to myself, it won't happen again. But it did. The second time, I walked outside and felt my throat tighten. Fresh tracks gouged across the lawn, tulips crushed into the dirt, another section of fence shattered. And parked across the street, leaning against a shiny new truck with arms folded, was him, Jake. His grin was smug, deliberate. His eyes told me this wasn't an accident. This was sport. Jake wasn't just some stranger. He was Melissa's new boyfriend. Melissa, the woman my husband left me for, the woman who had smiled at me during church picnics while secretly plotting her way into my marriage. And now, her new man was standing across the road, daring me to do something about the mess he'd made. I felt anger rise, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it and marched across the street. I knocked on their door, my pulse hammering in my ears. Melissa answered, silk robe wrapped around her like armor, lips curled in a knowing smirk. Jake's been driving through my yard, I said bluntly, my voice shaking with fury I tried to hide. He crushed my plants. He broke my fence. Melissa laughed. Not a polite laugh, a full-bodied, mocking laugh that dripped with cruelty. Oh, Hannah, she said, tilting her head. Men will be men. Besides, Jake's a real man. Maybe he's just helping you toughen up. The words hit harder than the truck tires had. I stood there, stunned. This wasn't just disrespect, it was humiliation. I opened my mouth to argue, but Melissa rolled her eyes and shut the door in my face, the sound echoing through my bones like a gunshot. I told myself to let it go, that it wasn't worth stooping to their level. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, I realized they weren't done. My entire yard was destroyed. The roses I had nurtured for months, shredded, stems snapped, and petals scattered like confetti at a funeral. The koi pond I had poured weeks of labor into was cracked, the water draining into the soil. Fence posts yanked out like toothpicks. Diesel fumes still hung in the air, clinging to the destruction. Jake had driven straight through the yard as if it were nothing more than a battlefield to conquer. And as I stood there, surrounded by the ruins of everything I had built, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a woman with a broken heart anymore. I wasn't just the ex-wife Melissa loved to mock. I was done being their punchline. They thought I was soft, that I would cry, patch the damage, and keep pretending everything was fine. But they had forgotten who I used to be. And that was their first mistake. They think a quiet woman is an unarmed one. They forget that silence can be a sheath. After the wreckage, I sat at the edge of the patio with dirt under my nails and diesel fumes still stinging the back of my throat. The sky was that dull iron color right before dawn, and for a moment I just listened. A mourning dove somewhere beyond the fence, a neighbor's air conditioner clicking off, water from the cracked pond draining into the soil with a soft, relentless hiss. And underneath all of it, a voice I hadn't heard in years. You know how to stop this, Hannah. You've always known. Before I married, before I mistook compromise for love, I was a systems engineer for a private security firm. Perimeter defense, sensor grids, silent alerts that went to the right phone at the right time. My team handled ranches in tornado country, cabins off mountain switchbacks, warehouses with too many blind corners. I walked away from that world because managing fear for a living can warp the way you look at every open door. I wanted a gentler life. so I chose a kitchen remodel over night vision calibrations, Sunday farmers markets over contingency plans, a husband who said he loved my softness. Softness is not weakness, it's control. I went inside, washed my hands until the water ran clear, and opened the storage cabinet in the laundry room. Old habits die carefully. I'd kept enough to secure a property without turning it into a prison. Work light, drill, anchors. A bin of components labeled the way you label spices. Simple, almost domestic. I carried everything to the kitchen table and laid it out like a surgeon. My phone buzzed. Evan. I stared at his name a second longer than necessary. We've been seeing each other for 3 months, slow and respectful, the kind of pacing you learn after you've rushed before and lost. He knows I like black coffee and dislike being touched from behind. I know his ex-girlfriend still tries to weaponize nostalgia when she's lonely. We haven't told neighbors or family. Some sanctuaries should be protected from casual gossip. Hey, I answered, forcing my voice to steady. Couldn't sleep, he said. Something felt off. Are you okay? I told him about the garden. He went quiet in that careful way. Decent men go quiet when they're measuring whether to offer help or honor a boundary. Do you want me there? He asked. No, I said, and meant it kindly. I need to handle this. A beat. Then you will. After we hung up, I pulled my hair into a knot and got to work. Step 1. Structure. They had ripped up fence posts like toothpicks. Not again. I measured each broken gap and drilled pilot holes into concrete footers I'd poured months ago. My one concession to paranoia after a storm kicked the old fence loose. Reinforced posts disguised with cedar sleeves slid into place, locked with brackets that would laugh at a bumper's shove. Step 2. Intelligence. I installed low-profile vibration sensors under the soil along the arc Jake favored, the lazy S-curve that turned my yard into a stage for his swagger. The sensors fed a small hub mounted inside the garage, a hub that pinged my phone when a weight profile above a certain threshold passed over them. I calibrated the threshold to favor heavy vehicles. No sense in waking me for a cat. Step 3. Sight. 2 motion-triggered cameras, one mounted high under the eaves, angled to catch the street approach. The other stashed in a faux birdhouse that watched the drive. Infrared at night. No blinking lights. No show. Step 4. Deterrence without escalation. There are lines you don't cross, not because you're afraid, but because you respect the way consequences ripple. I lined the inside of the driveway with retractable tire deflectors, legal, non-lethal devices that sit flush until activated. A fob in my pocket would raise them 3 inches, if and only if a heavy axle crossed a sensor boundary. Not spikes. Think steel teeth that tell a driver, enough. Step 5. The choke point. The last 2 times, Jake cut through the same section of lawn, a stubborn path between the hydrangeas and the curve of the pond. Men like Jake are patterns dressed as people. I carved a shallow trench there, 2 inches deeper than it looked, and covered it with a thin crust of compacted dirt. Beneath that crust, a custom steel grid designed to crumple cheap undercarriages and snare bumpers. It wouldn't hurt him. It would hold him. If he tried to reverse hard, the retractors at the driveway would finish the conversation. By noon, the fence held like a spine. By 4, the grid lay invisible beneath the earth. By dusk, the cameras whispered yes in test pings to my phone. I walked the garden in the blue hour, touching leaves the way you touch foreheads to check for fever. I whispered apologies to the wrecked roses, promises to the koi I'd relocate once the pond was mended, vows to the part of me that still flinched when I heard Melissa's laugh echoing from across the street. They think you're soft, I told the hibiscus, the cracked flagstones, the empty pond. Let them. Night spread over the neighborhood like a polished sheet. The street went quiet. A distant dog barked at nothing, or at everything. It's impossible to tell the difference in suburbs. I brewed tea, set the mug on the porch railing, and opened the app. Sensor grid, green. Cameras, armed. Driveway retractors, standby. Alert profile, heavy vehicle only. At 1:11 a.m., a moth tapped the porch light 3 times like a tiny knuckle. At 1:22, I heard the slow hush of an engine idling low. The app pinged soft as a heartbeat. Zone 3, approach detected. I didn't move. Zone 2, right perimeter. The porch caught a sliver of chrome as the truck slid past with its lights off, arrogance thinking darkness is a disguise. He turned without braking, the way you turn into a driveway you've used 100 times. His front wheels hit the lawn, rolled over the first line of sensors, and the screen in my hand flashed. Heavy profile confirmed. I pressed my thumb to the fob in my pocket. The retractors rose with a quiet, final click along the inside edge of the drive. The truck committed. A split second later, the front axle dropped. The dirt crust over the trench collapsed like a false floor, giving way under a stage magician's apprentice. There was a deep, metal-on-metal clong as the bumper met the grid, the sound a tuning fork would make if it were angry. His left tire hissed, then screamed. The right followed. He tried to yank the wheel and punch it forward, and the undercarriage grated over steel with a sound that tore through the night and into the marrow. "Are you kidding me?" His shout sliced the dark. "Are you?" He slammed reverse. Bad idea. The tires bit air. The moment the rear axle rolled toward freedom, the retractors kissed rubber with a neat, savage efficiency. One pop, then another. The truck slumped, canted, trapped. The kind of trapped that drains a man's certainty faster than any handcuff. Steam feathered from the hood. Fluids began their slow, guilty drip onto the dirt. The neighborhood stayed mercifully asleep, except for one living room curtain that lifted by an inch, then fell like someone deciding the show could be watched on social feeds tomorrow. I set my mug down, picked up the flashlight, and stepped into the yard. The night air was cool enough to sting my cheeks. My robe hung straight, my feet found the path without looking. When the beam found Jake, he was already out of the cab, lurching on adrenaline and pride, eyes wide with the kind of fear that prefers to call itself anger. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, limping toward the grill like he could shame it into apology. "What did you do to my truck?" "Deterrence," I said, voice even. "On my property, for repeat trespassers." "You sabotaged me," he snarled. "You could have killed me." "If you'd obeyed the fence, the cameras, the 3 police reports on file, and the decency you were born with," I said, "you would have driven past like everyone else on this street." He staggered once more, then found his footing in rage. "I'll sue. I'll bury you." I lifted my phone and let the porch light catch the small red timestamp blinking in the corner. "You've been recorded every time you've done this," I said. "Tonight included. The undercarriage damage is yours. The lawn is mine." He took a step toward me. I took none. Behind him, the truck exhaled another wet, defeated breath. Somewhere down the block, a dog decided now was an appropriate time to remember its duty. I tapped my screen. "Officer Cruz has our history," I added. "And my call. They're on their way." His face drained, then flooded, then drained again like a poorly wired lamp. For a heartbeat, I saw the little boy he might have been, the one who learned that breaking something got attention faster than building it. Then the mask slid back on. "You think you won?" He gestured wide at the garden, like a bad magician revealing a trick failed by witnesses. "You think any of this makes you, what, strong?" "No," I said. "It makes me finished." He opened his mouth. Somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, the first smear of sirens rose, thin, distant, inevitable. "You should go wait by the curb," I added. "Your truck can't go anywhere, but you still can." He looked at the ruined beast in the dirt, at the garden he'd tried to conquer, at the woman he'd mismeasured. For a second, something like comprehension flickered. Then he shook his head, set his jaw, and stayed exactly where he was, as if stubbornness could become a shield at the last possible moment. I turned the flashlight off and let the dark return. The porch light haloed the front steps. The roses, what remained of them, held their silhouettes like saints who had seen worse and survived it. The app on my phone pulsed again. External headlights approaching. I exhaled. Let the record show. I asked nicely, then documented, then defended. And when push came to lawn, I did not push back. I simply held the line and let his momentum teach him what my words could not. Some people only understand boundaries when they crash into them. The sirens grew louder, weaving through the sleeping neighborhood until blue and red strobes washed across the white siding of my house. Tires crunched to a stop. Doors opened. Footsteps on asphalt. Jake stood frozen, his chest heaving, eyes darting between me, his crippled truck, and the approaching officers. For the first time since this ordeal began, the grin was gone. Officer Cruz stepped forward. I recognized him immediately. He had responded to 2 of my earlier complaints when I filed reports about the vandalism. His brow furrowed as he took in the scene. Jake's truck nose deep in my garden, tires shredded, fence posts intact behind it like an unbroken line of soldiers. "Ms. Wallace," Cruz said with a small nod. "We got your call. Everything all right here?" I lifted my phone, screen still recording. "He's the one who's been destroying my garden," I said evenly. Tonight he came back. I warned him this would happen if it continued. Jake exploded, waving his arms toward the ruined truck. "She set traps. This lunatic sabotaged me. She could have killed me." Cruz raised one hand to quiet him. His partner moved to circle the truck, shining a flashlight over the punctured tires, the steel grid beneath the bumper, the fluid seeping into the dirt. "Sir, you're on private property," Cruz said coolly, "at 1:30 in the morning. And it looks like you've done some serious damage." "You don't understand," Jake sputtered. "She planned this. It's entrapment." I stepped forward, my voice calm but cutting. Entrapment is when a suspect is tricked into committing a crime they wouldn't have otherwise committed. This is deterrence. You've been warned, repeatedly. You chose to trespass. You chose to destroy. Jake turned to Cruz, desperation leaking into his tone. "You can't let her get away with this." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "Here's the footage," I said, handing it to the second officer. "Every incident. Tire treads matching his truck. Tonight's live recording. An audio from my last conversation with Melissa, where she laughed at me when I said I'd build a case." The officer plugged it into a tablet and scrolled. His eyebrows arched as the video played. Jake's truck, swerving over my lawn, crushing flowers, snapping posts, his voice muttering curses from an open window. Tonight's footage showing him creep in with his lights off, grinning at the wheel before disaster struck. "This is pretty clear," the officer muttered, turning the screen toward Cruz. Jake's bravado wavered. He opened his mouth, but Cruz cut him off sharply. "Turn around." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the cool night air. Jake stiffened, shock rippling across his face. "What? You can't—" "Yes, we can," Cruz said. "Trespassing, criminal mischief, destruction of property. We'll let the DA sort the rest." At that moment, headlights flared down the street. A black SUV screeched to a stop at the curb, and the door flew open. Melissa stumbled out, pajama pants and a silk robe thrown on in haste. Her hair was wild, her eyes wide, scanning the chaos until they landed on Jake in handcuffs. "What the hell is going on?" she shrieked. I didn't answer. Cruz did, his voice level. "Ma'am, your boyfriend has been caught trespassing and vandalizing Ms. Wallace's property. This isn't the first time. We have evidence." Melissa's face blanched, then flushed crimson. She turned toward me, eyes narrowing into slits. "You really had to go this far, Hannah?" she hissed. "You couldn't just let it go?" I held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "No, Melissa. You went too far the first time you laughed in my face, and when he destroyed my fence." Her jaw tightened, but before she could spit another word, she spun on Jake. Her palm cracked against his cheek with a sound that silenced even the night insects. "You told me it was just a joke," she snapped, "that he wouldn't do anything." Jake glared at her, seething. "This is your fault. You said she was weak, that she'd never fight back." Melissa folded her arms, her lips curling in disgust. "Looks like you were wrong." The officers led Jake toward the squad car. Neighbors began peeking through curtains, one or two stepping onto porches with phones in hand. I knew what would happen next. This moment wouldn't stay confined to our street. By morning, the video would be online, and Jake's smug grin would be replaced with the image of him, handcuffed, humiliated, exposed. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something sharper, vindication wrapped in sorrow. Because this was never about revenge. It was about respect, about drawing a line they thought I would never defend. As the car doors slammed and the sirens carried Jake away, Melissa lingered in the middle of the street. Her hands shook, her eyes full of venom she tried to disguise as indignation. "You've ruined us," she spat. "No," I said quietly. "You ruined yourselves. I just stopped letting it slide." Her face crumpled, part fury, part fear of the social storm she knew was coming. She turned without another word, climbed into her SUV, and sped away. I stood alone in my yard, the garden broken, but the boundary restored, my breath fogging in the night air. And I knew this was only the beginning. The morning after Jake's arrest, the neighborhood was buzzing. I didn't need to check Facebook to know what had happened. By the time I brewed my first cup of coffee, 3 neighbors had already texted me. Someone had filmed the whole scene. The truck stuck in my yard. Jake cursing, limping, flailing. Melissa screaming in the street. the police locking cuffs around his wrists. The caption read, "Man wrecks ex-wife's garden. Ends up caught by her calm, calculated ex-husband's ex-wife. Karma in bloom." By noon, the video had over 10,000 views. By the end of the week, Jake was a laughingstock in half the city. But the internet wasn't his only problem. In court, the evidence spoke louder than either of us. My security footage, the tire tracks, the documented reports, the photos of months of damage. The judge barely raised an eyebrow before granting me a permanent restraining order. Jake was forbidden to come within 500 feet of me, my property, or any family members under my care. And then came restitution. The judge ordered him to cover the damages, every fence post, every rose bush, every cracked stone, $8,000 in total. His jaw tightened as if he'd bite the air itself. Melissa glared at me from the gallery, muttering about how I had ruined his career. But I didn't need to answer. The truth was doing it for me. Jake's employer had seen the viral video. By Monday, he was suspended without pay. By Friday, terminated. Melissa stormed into my yard one afternoon, her face blotched with rage. "You destroyed him," she snapped. I tilted my head, calm as a still pond. "No, he destroyed himself. I just recorded it." Her voice cracked under the weight of her own humiliation. "Do you know what this has done to me? My reputation? My family?" "You humiliated yourself the day you laughed at me," I said softly. "The day you told me Jake was a real man." She flinched as though I'd slapped her. Then she turned, and I watched her shoulders slump under the realization that her throne of superiority had always been built on sand. But I didn't want my story to end with her bitterness. I wanted it to end with something more. So I planned a celebration. 2 weeks later, I hosted a garden party. Not just any party, resilience in bloom. My neighbors, friends, and colleagues came together, each carrying laughter, food, or music. String lights crisscrossed the yard, a warm glow over freshly replanted beds of tulips and roses. The koi pond sparkled with clear water, restored and alive again. At the center of the yard stood a carved wooden sign, planted firmly into the soil. "To those who trample beauty, beware, the roots run deep." Guests chuckled when they read it, many snapping pictures. Some posed with the sign like it was a landmark, and in a way, it was. I walked among the guests, smiling as children chased butterflies along the lavender hedge. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel hollow. This wasn't just my victory, it was the garden's. Just as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, a woman approached me, mid-40s, kind eyes, a nervous smile. "You don't know me," she said, voice soft, "but I was Jake's girlfriend before Melissa." My breath caught. She continued, eyes glistening. "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, showing the world what he's really like, it matters. He ruined years of my life. He broke things in me I didn't think would heal. But you proved him wrong, publicly, finally." We stood quietly together, the hum of music and laughter around us. Her words weren't sharp, like Melissa's. They were heavy, but healing. "It's about time," she whispered. "Someone planted the right kind of seeds." That night, after the last guest left and the garden returned to silence, I sat by the koi pond. My nephew padded over, carrying a small pot with a seedling inside. He looked at me with wide, hopeful eyes. "Aunt Hannah," he asked, "do bullies always lose?" I pulled him close, my hand brushing dirt from his cheek. "Eventually, yes," I said, "because bullies forget the most important thing." "What's that?" "They never plant anything, but we do." He smiled, and together we pressed the seedling into the earth. The roots of justice ran deeper than any truck tire, deeper than Melissa's laughter, deeper than Jake's arrogance. This garden had been torn down, trampled, mocked, but now it stood reborn, stronger, brighter, and alive with every lesson I had learned. And for the first time, I knew I wasn't just rebuilding my sanctuary. I was planting resilience, planting peace. And no one would ever take that from me again.